Good evening, everyone. As we have studied about nutrition and respiration in our previous classes, today we will continue our discussion with circulation. Now, what do you mean by circulation and why circulation is necessary to sustain the life processes? By the process of nutrition, we take in the nutrients in our body, and by the process of respiration, we break down the food particles into smaller food particles or into smaller substances. By the process of circulation, the nutrients that gets broken down by the process of respiration is circulated throughout the body because the food particles that we consume is in the stomach, and from the stomach or in the small intestine or large intestine, whatever it is, it needs to be circulated throughout the body for the purpose of nutrition, for the complete purpose of nutrition. So today we will continue the topic of circulation. What do you mean by circulation, or why circulation is necessary? Circulation is a process of transporting substances all across the body with the help of fluid connective tissue named as a blood, or in some cases lymph. Now, what are the functions of the circulation? There are mainly three types of function. One is to regulate the temperature. Another is to transport nutrients. Across the body. Nutrients, hormones, etc. And for the transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, the function of to regulate temperature is also known as homeostasis. Homeostasis is a phenomena by which the overall body temperature is maintained throughout the body. With the help of circulation, the blood travels throughout the body and regulates the body temperature all over the body. Now, the second point is to transfer the nutrients, hormones, etc. across the body. Our hormone glands, our glands produces hormones, and that hormones are nutrients that we take in by the process of nutrition needs to be circulated all across the body, and this is done by the help of circulation. With the help of circulation, the blood carries the hormones, the nutrients, some waste particles, and many more other things that we will discuss later is transported with the help of the blood or the fluid connective tissue. Transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Remember that in the lecture of respiration, I have said that in alveoli, the transportation of the oxygen or the carbon dioxide takes place from the blood to the alveoli, where the actual where the actual interchange of the gaseous particle takes place. That is where it comes. The blood travels to the alveoli, and the carbon dioxide rich blood becomes interchanges the carbon dioxide with the oxygen in the alveoli and thus becomes oxygenated. This process is necessary for sustaining the life process, as we are aerobic organism and we need oxygen to sustain the life process, and thus transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place with the help of circulation. Moving on, we will see the components of the circulatory system. The circulatory system is also known as a cardiovascular system. Circulatory system has three components. One is the heart, second is blood, and third is blood vessel. These three components form the main circulatory components of the circulatory system. The heart is regarded as a pumping organ. It pumps the blood all across the body from the weight, from including our brain to the tip of the toe. Everything is covered with the help of circulatory system. Next, we have the blood, which is regarded as a transport medium. The blood acts as a medium for the circulation. With the help of blood in the blood, certain nutrients, hormones, etc. are there, which helps in the overall circulatory system of the human body. Next is a blood vessel, which acts as a transport pathway. The blood travels inside the blood vessel. That is, inside the blood vessel, the blood travels. The blood is there. It travels all across the body. Now, human have closed circulatory system. We don't have an open circulatory system like some insects. We have a closed circulatory system. What do you mean by closed circulatory system? The closed circulatory system is regarded as the one in which the blood flows across the vessels. And in some cases, mainly in insects, the blood mainly flows without the help of any vessel. That is regarded as an open circulatory system. Now moving on, we will go to the structure of the heart. Heart has four chambers. What are those? Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. As you can see, there is a schematic representation of the heart. This is the right atrium. What happens in the right atrium is that the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava brings in the deoxygenated blood. By the way, our circulatory system is double circulatory system. What do you mean by double circulatory system? Double circulatory system is regarded as the one in which both deoxygenated and oxygenated blood flows across simultaneously and continuously. That is, both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood passes to the heart, and in a heart, the same blood passes through twice in the heart. That is regarded as a double circulatory system. Now, coming back to the topic, in this schematic representation, this is the right atrium, and as you can see, into the right atrium, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava brings the deoxygenated blood from all across the body into the right atrium. The superior vena cava brings in the deoxygenated blood from the upper portion of the body, that is the portion that is above the heart, and the inferior vena cava brings in the deoxygenated blood, that is from the lower portion of the body, that is below the heart. The deoxygenated blood from all across the body get transported into the right atrium, and from the right atrium it gets pumped into the right ventricle, and the right atrium and the right ventricle are guarded by a valve named as tricuspid valve, meaning there are three valves that are acting together that prevents a backflow of the blood from the ventricle to the right atrium. To prevent it, there is a tricuspid valve, and for the right ventricle, there is a pulmonary artery through which the pulmonary artery goes to the lungs for the oxygenation of the blood. For the oxygenation of the blood. The right ventricle and the pulmonary artery is also guarded by a valve known as pulmonary valve. Now moving on to the left atrium, the left ventricle. The pulmonary vein brings in the oxygenated blood. Brings in the oxygenated blood from the lungs into the left atrium. And the left atrium further pumps the blood in the left ventricle. This left atrium and left ventricle are guarded or also guarded by a valve known as mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. What do you mean by bicuspid valve? There are two valves that are acting together to prevent the backflow of the blood. From the left ventricle, it further goes into the aorta. What do you mean by the aorta? Aorta is a specialized blood vessel that carries the oxygenated blood from to all across the body from the very beginning of the human body, that is from the tip of the human body to the toe of the human body. The aorta carries the oxygenated blood. The wall of the left ventricle are comparatively thicker than the right ventricle. Why? Because the left ventricle has to pump the blood, oxygenated blood, to all over the body. That's why it has a thick wall, because it needs greater pressure to pump the blood. Now this right ventricle and left ventricle are separated by a septum known as interventricular septum. This helps in the preventing and mixing of the oxygenated blood. Here it is a deoxygenated blood. Here it is a deoxygenated blood and it is a oxygenated blood. To prevent the mixing of the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood, there is a thick membrane known as an interventricular septum that separates the mixing of the deoxygenated blood with the oxygenated blood. Now, moving on, as we have said that the right atrium and the right ventricle are associated with the deoxygenated blood, and the left atrium and the left ventricle are associated with the oxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood comes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle it goes to the lungs with the, through pulmonary artery, and from the left atrium it goes to the left ventricle, and the left ventricle further goes to the aorta to transport the oxygenated blood all across the human body. Now moving on, there are we will learn about the cardiac cycle. There are two phases of the cardiac cycle. One is systole and another one is diastole. What do you mean by cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle is regarded as one complete heartbeat. That is, the deoxygenated blood will come from the all over the body. It will come into the right atrium, then followed by the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. Then it will flow to the lungs for the oxygenation of the blood, and from the lungs it will come to the pulmonary vein. From the pulmonary vein, it will go into left atrium, and from the left atrium to left ventricle, and from the left ventricle to aorta to further parts of the body. This whole complete cycle is known as a cardiac cycle, that is regarded as a one complete heartbeat. Now, cardiac cycle has two phases. One is diastole and another one is systole. What do you mean by diastole? Diastole is regarded as a phase of the cardiac cycle in which the heart relaxes, that is, fills in with the blood. And what is regarded as a systole? Systole is regarded as the phenomena in which the heart contracts, that is, it expels out the blood, that is, it pumps out the blood for the further oxygenation, deoxygenation purposes. Diastole is associated with the relaxing of the heart and systole is related to the contraction of the heart. Now, if you ever get a chance to listen to the heartbeat with the help of a stethoscope, you will hear lub-dub sound. How that lub-dub sounds are produced? As I mentioned before, the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve that are present in between the right atrium and the right ventricle and the left atrium and left ventricle separate respectively. When this valve closes down, it produces lub sound. It produces a lub-dub sound. The lub sound is produced due to the closing of the bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve. Now, when does the dub sound is produced? Dub sound is produced due to the closing down the semilunar valves. What are the semilunar valves? The valves that are present in the pulmonary artery known as the pulmonary valve, and the valve that is present in the aorta or the aortic valve. When these two valves closes down, it produces dub sound. Hence, in one complete cycle, you will hear the lub-dub sound. Now, don't think that if the heart blood is coming here, then it will go. No, it doesn't happen like that. Both of the processes occurring simultaneously. Both the ventricles pumps out the blood together. Both the right and left atrium pumps or relaxes together. It's a continuous and a simultaneous procedure. It doesn't mean that only right atrium is relaxing and the left atrium is contracting. No, it doesn't happen. Both of them occur simultaneously. That's why a common sound is produced known as a lub dub sound. Now, moving on, we will speak about the connective tissue that is flowing across the heart. That is the blood. By the way, the heart beats for 70 to 72 times per minute in an average a healthy adult, and the size of a heart is about a closed fist. That is, if you close your fist, then whatever the size it is a size of the heart. And the heart is slightly tilted towards the left and it is present in between the lungs. If you place your hand over your left wrist, you will hear or sense some kind of beating, and that is due to the pumping on the heart. The heart beats for 70 to 72 times per minute in average adult. In average adult. Now moving on to the composition of the blood. The blood is regarded as a fluid connective tissue. What do you mean by fluid connective tissue? Fluid describes its state of nature, and the connective tissue is that it connects all over the since it flows all across the body and collects waste material, transports nutrient, hormones, oxygen, carbon dioxide, etc. It is regarded as a connective tissue because it connects all the tissues over the body. Now, in an average human, about 5 to 6 liters of blood is present in an average healthy adult. There are certain diseases associated with the low amount of blood or low amount of hemoglobin, which we will study later on. Now, moving on, we will study about the components of the blood. Blood has 4 components. One is plasma. Second one is RBC, red blood cell. Third one is WBC, white blood cell. And fourth one is platelets. This RBC is also regarded as erythrocyte. Its other name is erythrocyte. And the WBC is also known as leukocyte. The platelets are also known as thrombocytes. The plasma constitutes of 55% of blood. What does the plasma contains? The plasma contains water, nutrients, proteins, hormones, etc. What does the RBC contains? It contains hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an iron protein that helps in the transportation of the carbon dioxide and oxygen. Then we have the WBC, which are also regarded as a leukocyte. The leukocyte is associated with the immunity. Associated with the immunity. The platelets are associated with the clotting of the blood. Which we will discuss later. Uh, right now, if you think like you have gotten cut by some kind of accident, after a few days, that cut gets healed by its own. How does it happen? That happens when special mechanism of the human body, known as blood clotting or coagulation, which we will explain later on. Now, moving on, these are the components of the blood. This is made up of 55 percentage of the blood, and rest other are made up of 45 percentage of the blood. It constitutes 45 percentage, and it is considered of 55 percentage. This names erythrocyte, leukocyte, and thrombocyte are important in terms of your exam, in both in for the school exams and for the board exams. Now moving on, we will study about the third main component of the circulation, that is the blood vessels. We have three types of blood vessels. One is artery, another one is vein, another one is capillary. What is the function of artery? The artery vein usually carries oxygenated blood. Carries oxygenated blood. That is a blood that is rich in oxygen. The vein carries the deoxygenated blood. And the capillary act as a connection or a junction between the artery and the vein. Now you will ask me, how does this pulmonary artery is flowing with the deoxygenated blood towards the lung? This is the only exception in case of the definition of artery and vein. The pulmonary artery brings the deoxygenated blood to the lungs for oxygenation, and the pulmonary vein carries the oxygenated blood to the left atrium for the pumping out of the oxygenated blood. These two are the exceptions which are very important in terms of your exam. Now, what are the examples of the artery? You can write it as for artery, you can write as aorta. For vein, you can write as a vena cava. It can be superior or inferior. The capillary acts as a connection in between the artery and the vein. It has a thin microscopic vessels which connects the arteries and the veins. It allows the exchange of the oxygen, nutrients, oxygen gaseous nutrients and hormones, salts, etc. Now, moving on, we know that it is a double circulatory system. Oxygenated blood rich in oxygen, deoxygenated blood rich in carbon dioxide. As I mentioned earlier, there are circulatory system is double circulatory system. Double circulatory system is a process in which the same blood travels to the heart twice. How? Because the deoxygenated blood that is coming from the our body are transferred to the right atrium, then followed by the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. This pulmonary artery takes the deoxygenated blood to the lungs for the oxygenation, and the oxygenated blood that comes from the lungs are transferred to the left atrium, followed to the left ventricle. This left ventricle pumps the oxygenated blood to the aorta, and the aorta takes the oxygenated blood to all over the parts of the body. Now, we will study about the blood pressure. We have heard the term blood pressure from very beginning of our life. We can say that. What do you mean by blood pressure? What is the normal blood pressure range? Blood pressure, since we know that since ours is a closed circulatory system, the blood is traveling across the vessels, and since the blood is flowing across the vessels, it exerts some force on the vessel walls of the vessels. Suppose inside a pipe, water is flowing down, then the water exerts some force on the pipe. Similarly, the blood also exerts some force on the vessels. This pressure is regarded as a blood pressure. Blood pressure, force exerted by the blood into the vessel. What is the range of a normal blood pressure in average healthy humans? It is 120 by 80 mmHg. The 120 is regarded as a systolic pressure. And the 80 is regarded as a diastolic pressure. Okay. The diastole, as we have mentioned earlier, is when the heart relaxes or when the heart fills in the blood is regarded as a diastole, and when the heart contracts or pumps up the blood, it is regarded as a systole. Now, moving on, we have said that there are certain diseases that are associated with the circulatory system. What are those? Hypertension or hypotension, leukemia, anemia, heart attack, what do you mean by hypertension and hypotension? As we have mentioned earlier, that this is the normal blood pressure of an average healthy human. If the blood pressure is greater than this, in some cases, mainly our parents have 130, 140 or 160 of blood pressure. Uh, in medical science, up to 140 of pressure is regarded as a normal in a real life scenario. And but in theoretically, if pressure is larger than 120 per 80, it is regarded as a hypertension. What do you mean by hypertension? Hypertension is a high blood pressure. And what do you mean by the hypotension? When the blood pressure is lower than this benchmark, then it is regarded as a hypotension. Now, moving on to the next, we have leukemia. Leukemia is regarded as a cancer of the WBC. When the WBC starts to replicate without any checkpoints, without anything, that is the amount of the WBC is increasing exponentially in the cell or in the body, it is regarded as a leukemia. Next, we have anemia. If someone is suffering from low blood count or low hemoglobin count, then that is regarded as anemia. Low blood count or low hemoglobin, it is regarded as anemia. Now, we have all heard about heart attack. What is a heart attack? Heart attack is regarded as when there is any blockage of oxygen towards the cardiac muscles. Heart is made up of cardiac muscles. If there is any blockage of oxygenation in the cardiac muscle, through the help of the coronary artery brings in the oxygenated blood from the aorta to the heart. Listen very carefully. The coronary artery brings in the oxygenated blood from the aorta to the heart. Since the heart is also a muscle, it requires oxygen for its blood process to sustain. If there is any blockage in the coronary artery, then that results into heart attack. The blockage can be due to the fat deposition or many other reasons that may lead to heart attack. Now, we have studied about the blood circulatory system. There is another circulatory system that is present in the body. That is a lymphatic system. What do you mean by lymph? There is another circulatory system known as the lymphatic system. Now, to introduce to the lymphatic system, first we have to understand what is lymph. Lymph is a colorless fluid that flows intracellularly. That is, it may or may not flow through a vessel. It is the extracellular fluid. It is also a connective tissue, by the way. Like the blood, it is also a connective tissue that flows across the lymph vessel, not the blood vessel. They have specialized vessels for the transportation of the lymph. They are regarded as lymph vessels. When blood leaks out, we have studied about the capillaries. The capillaries is somewhat like this. Suppose it is a vein and it is the artery. And suppose the blood that is flowing in between the vein and the artery leaks out, then the plasma the plasma from the plasma that leaks out from the blood into the outer spaces are regarded as lymph. This leaking out of the plasma or the extracellular or the extra material that gets leaked out in the capillaries are regarded as lymph. Now we will study about the composition of the lymph. What is lymph made of? Lymph is made up of water, salt, nutrients, WBC, and protein. Remember that the lymph does not contain RBC. The lymph does not contain RBC, and the protein that is present in the lymph, it is very little, kind of negligible as compared to the composition of the blood. The lymph consists of water, soil, nutrients, WBC and protein. That is whatever that is present in the plasma, it is present in the lymph. Apart from this, only WBC is present. No platelets and RBCs are present. Now, moving on, we will learn about the lymphatic system. We have heard about the circulatory system. It consisted of three main components: heart, blood vessel, and blood. Now, we will study about the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system comprises of same three, but it is lymph vessel, and lymph node. Lymph vessels are the vessels that helps in the flowing of the lymph, or that transports the lymph back to the blood. And lymph nodes are regarded as a small bean shaped of the structure. They are the small bean shaped structure that filters the lymph. The small bean shape of structure. It filters the lymph. If the lymph contains a bacteria, it contains a bacteria, contains any bacteria or virus, it will get trapped in the node. That is, it helps in the immunity. The lymphatic system supports us in the immunity purposes. If the lymph is containing any bacteria or any other thing that is harmful to the body, it will get trapped in the lymph node, and the lymph node helps in the filtering of the lymph. Filtering of lymph. Now, what are the functions of the lymph? It helps in transportation of the fat, return the tissue fluid to the blood, return the tissue fluid to the blood, and the immunity. The tissue fluid is regarded as a thing, so this fluid is leaking out of the capillaries. That is, it should not happen. By the way, it should not happen. It's not. It was unnecessary. So it needs to be back to the blood, and the lymphatic system helps in the bringing the fluid back to the blood. It helps in transportation of fats, and in case of immunity purposes, by the process that I mentioned right now, the lymph node traps any bacteria or viruses if the lymph contains. That is helps in the overall immunity. Now, moving on to the next very important topic is the blood clotting. This is also known as a coagulation. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any cut or you have gotten any injury, then after few days that injury sustains and that heals on its own. A reddish brown like structure is produced that helps in stopping the oozing out of the blood. That reddish brown structure is regarded as a mesh, and after the mesh gets peeled off, new skin appears. This whole mechanism of healing from an injury is regarded as blood clotting. That's the special feature of our circulatory system. Now, what happens is that I have mentioned earlier that the platelets act in the help in the blood clotting. How that helps, we will now study. When a blood vessel get injured, when a blood vessel gets injured, what happens? The platelets rushes into that region and form a temporary structure called the platelet plug. Remind you that it is a temporary structure. That is, while the real mesh is formed to stop the oozing out of the blood permanently, temporarily a structure is formed with the help of the platelets that gets rushed into the area that is regarded as a platelet plug. This platelet plug releases thromboplastin along with some calcium ions, along with some clotting factors like IF6, etc. that is not required for your syllabus. Clotting factors and vitamin K. What happens is that this complex activates the prothrombin into thrombin. This is in inactivated state, and in presence of this whole complex thing, it forms into activated state. It gets activated in presence of the whole complex. Now, this vitamin K synthesizes the prothrombin, synthesizes in the liver. The liver, the prothrombin gets synthesized, which is very important for in terms of your exam. If there is any question for 1 mark or 2 marks, this is the answer. The prothrombin is synthesized in the liver in presence of with the help of vitamin K. Now, this activated thrombin further activates a plasma protein. Further, it activates the plasma protein. That is, it converts the fibrinogen into fibrin. The inactivated fibrinogen gets converted into fibrin in presence of thrombin. This fibrin forms a mesh of the permanent mesh-like structure, which results into clotting. This was a temporary structure and this is a permanent structure. Let me explain again. Whenever a body cell or blood vessel gets injured, the platelets that is present in the blood gets rushed into that region. The platelet forms a platelet plug. This is a temporary structure, and this platelet plug releases thromboplastin. The thromboplastin, in presence of calcium ion, some clotting factors, and some vitamin K, activates the prothrombin into the thrombin. The thrombin in turn activates the fibrinogen into the fibrin, and the fibrin finally forms the mesh. The mesh is a permanent structure, and thus the clotting of the blood vessel occurs. The permanent structure or the mesh-like structure prevents the oozing out of the blood or the loss of the blood, and hence the region gets healed up. That's it for today. That is the overall concept of the circulation. And in the next video, we will cover the topic of excretion.